Have you set a course for your life? Do you do that every day? Knowing what you want is intention. Knowing how to get there is a study in conscious action. This is a show about living consciously. It is about our choices, our hopes, our dreams, our work, our loves, our vision, and the practice of healing and becoming. Welcome to Cruising in the Light and Shadow. Hello, I am Sheila Marie, also known as Kicha.
And I am Inanna Moon. Welcome.
So, as I've said before, one of the best things about this podcast is I get to meet your friends, you get to meet my friends, and every time I meet your friends, oh my gosh, it's like I feel like we've known each other and don't ever leave my life. I like you.
Share a background.
Yeah. So we have a friend of yours here today.
Yes, and I would love, it is my pleasure to introduce Corey Roberts.
Yay.
We worked together at Alexandria 2 bookstore.
In Pasadena, California.
Yes, where I still am. Corey has since gone on to other adventures. But Corey, would you please tell us a little bit about your background and what you do and your interests? Because I think this audience is going to find you fascinating.
God, where to start? I am so easily bored that I've gotten into way too many things over the course of my life.
Yes.
I understand that it's a through line that a lot of the people that you bring on here have
it's true.
have an acting background.
Yes. See, I knew it too. I'm like, I bet.
Yeah, I just have that glint in my eye, I suppose. And I do have training to be a theater professor. I did a little bit of that, and that's fine. I also studied something along the lines of performance studies, which says, okay, well, you're on stage, you're doing this performance, but performance happens all over the place.
Yes.
In fact, who we are in life is a performance as well. And one of the things I was talking about with Inanna the other day is how there's this through line between people who are involved in acting and spirituality, because
Yes. Yes. Sorry.
And said, I believe Sheila Marie would like to talk with you about this, so go ahead.
Well, the idea is that we are performing in every bit of life. We wake up and we're one person, but then we interact with that first person in the day and a different persona, even though it may not be very different, but it's a different persona that we wear.
And who are you today? No,
I ask myself that same question.
every waking
Before
morning.
coffee, after coffee.
A few hours, actually. But when it comes to engaging the spirit as well, depending on what your beliefs are, there are so many different types of energies that are around you. And for each of those, you may adopt a different persona. And I'm not talking about like multiple personalities per se, but different facets of your personality come to the forefront when you're engaging different aspects of spirit. And I think that the more flexible you are from whatever it is that you're doing in life, whether it be acting professionally, some other form of the arts, or just how you live your life, I think that spirit is able to engage you a lot more easily, or different aspects of spirit are able to engage you. So being a performer, I think, is kind of perfect for spirituality. Now, I'm not saying for all those people out there that are wanting to deepen their spiritual practice that you need to go take an acting class.
Although
although
could be healing.
Sometimes.
There could be a case made for that. But anyway, all that to say, there is some acting in the background, but I get into a lot of different things. Most recently, I'm into linguistics and language.
Ooh.
I've always been a big fan of languages. I speak 6, and not all fluent. I can get by. Some are more fluent than others.
What'd you get?
Oh, right.
She's all excited.
So, yeah, I had some time studying Spanish and French and Portuguese, Russian, and an African language from Senegal, West Africa, called Wolof. I'm actually working on a Native American language right now from people that I'm descended from. And the language, it's another piece that's kind of like acting. It's like, when you're expressing yourself in the language you were born in, it's a particular type of personality, but a different energy, a different spirit, a different way of thinking about words, and a different way of thinking, period, comes upon you when you switch into a different language.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I speak Spanish. That was my first language.
Wonderful.
And you're absolutely right. Yeah.
It shifts your personality.
It really does.
Doesn't it?
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you.
Pardon my French, but I'm a total language whore. If I get the sense that anybody speaks another language, I'm like, hey, ¿cómo estás? Just testing the waters here.
That's awesome.
Wonderful to be that
Oh my God.
facile with
Yeah.
with language.
Oh, it's a smorgasbord here.
So
It is indeed.
we're already decided you will be coming back because there's so many questions on so
he's
many
already
topics.
mentioned about
Yeah.
30 topics here to look at. Senegal is interesting, but go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was remembering, actually, you have been to Senegal. It's not,
Right,
it's
I
not just
studied
that,
there.
that was an interest of yours. You actually,
Back
you
in the
studied
day,
there.
I studied there the academic year of 97, 98.
And what did you study?
I studied, so in undergrad, I made up my own major studying dance, theater, and all the languages.
Ooh.
And at the time, I had been studying and performing in African dance companies, and I thought, well, I want to go and learn African dance, and I want to do it in a place that doesn't have English as the colonial language. And that left basically only Senegal was the one that was available to me through a different university that was kind of like in the consortium of ones I studied at. And, they didn't give credit for studying dance in Senegal because in Senegal, at the time anyway, it was like, oh, you want to study dance? Well, let's go out to a party. You dance.
And dance.
And it's not like going to a party here where it's like everybody's booty shaking. No. You're going to this party. The whole community is out there. There's the 7-drum ensemble, the Sabar drums.
Oh.
And they're like, now dance. And the way they dance, it's like their feet hardly ever touch the ground. They're like, just do it like this because, they always danced like that. And it took me a little while.
So you're caught up in the spirit of the culture,
Yeah.
the people, the.
Absolutely. Now, by
I would
that
say
point,
I'd go back to spirit because I bet that's part of what lifts you off the ground.
well, and spirit was often associated with dance as well. By that point, I knew that there was something else spiritually going on, and I wasn't like overtly going to study spirituality or anything, but I knew that they were tied together. So I kept on saying, people, I want to study dance. I want to be around dance. And they said, well, you might want to go to this religious ceremony.
Ooh.
And so then I found myself, yes, seeing people dance, but also surrounded by people who were being possessed by spirits that were associated with their village. I saw all kinds of things going on. I had spirits appear to me. I had spirits jump into me, sit on me. And I was just thinking, I'm just trying to learn a dance move.
Now, how did so many questions? How did you deal with that? Was there someone there helping you understand what was going on, or did you have to process this on your own?
There absolutely was not. It was a lot. Now, I had a little bit of experience with this because basically there was a lot of spiritual capacity in my household. My
That was
sister
my
and
next
I,
question, yeah.
when we were young, we both channeled things through our dreams.
Ooh.
All right.
So my sister was very tuned into the Cold War, and she would have these very apocalyptic dreams, but there was a realness to them. There was this tangibility to the way she described her dreams that even as a child, I knew this was more than just a dream.
A dream, right.
And for me, it was actually the AIDS crisis because I was coming up in the early, mid-'80s where that was really a thing.
Yeah.
In fact, my mother's best friend unfortunately passed due to AIDS-related pneumocystis, and I was very close to her. It didn't appear to me as AIDS. I didn't understand the virus, and what was going on scientifically at the time. I was a little bit too young to be clued into that, but how it appeared to me was through what spiritual training I had, which was in Christianity. So it kept on appearing to me. And like it was like Dune, or Mad Max. It was post-apocalyptic desert, and people kept on coming up to me, and they were lepers. So it appeared through leprosy, and they kept on coming to me
and
for
that's
help.
how you experienced it.
And that's how I
Okay.
experienced it.
Right.
But I had shut all that down for the reasons that many of us kind of shut down in
Yeah.
childhood.
Sanity.
Well,
And not an understanding.
And lack of
Yeah.
safety in the home as well. I don't know how many of us grow up in ideal and functional families.
No,
Yeah.
no.
But I was not one of those.
Yeah.
So it kind of shut down in order to just get by. But once I
Right.
got into college, things started happening. And that was my first semester. I was 17 years old. I saw the wall open up. I had a being kind of sitting there and looking at me and communicating to me telepathically. And I had about lost my mind.
Yes.
Can I ask, did you ever tell your family, other than your sister, that you were experiencing these things when you were young?
No.
No, they would
no.
have. They
And-
would. They
and
would
in
have.
fact, I stopped experiencing them at 6 because of the way I chose to engage my family. in order to get by the sensitive soul that I was, I had to either acknowledge the truth and go to war early on, because truth has always been a very, very important thing to me. Or I had to deal with what was given to me and kind of shut down, and I chose the latter. I mean, I was 6. You know?
I did the same thing.
I would agree too. At about 6 was when, in my dysfunctional family, that I seemed to be so open to so many things. Also, there was a sense of taking care of my. I've talked about it before. Actually, my father in particular. It seemed like he needed so much care that.
Yes.
It isn't about a child always being allowed to be themselves, but having to be there for the family. And at about 6, it seems, is when we start to reach out and realize we have a role here. Talk about roles.
Right.
We have a role here. And so I remember that too, leaving off what was going on in my internal world and then later on picking it up. So for you, it was age?
Exactly that. It was 6 years old, and for me, it was being notified that there was some truth about my parents that were unacceptable to my moral system. And this is one of the areas where I needed to know that past lives existed, because the morality that I had since childhood, I must have been a religious figure, because it was really high on the horse. Like, where's this little kid getting off? You know, like wagging his finger with a Bible in hand. Like, what are you people doing?
All but wearing robes, right?
Exactly, actually. And I would wrap sheets around me as well. And
oh, goodness, so did I.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
Oh my gosh.
So did I.
My mother always used to say, get that
interesting.
blanket off of you. And I'd be like, what blanket?
But what do
This
you
is a
mean?
regalia, you
I'm
know?
a superhero.
Exactly. Well, for those who can't see, I'm wearing the Marvel Super Comics shirt with all the
T-shirt,
superheroes on it. Rest in peace, Stan Lee.
In honor of Stan, yes. Yeah.
And Paul, our engineer, is wearing Avenger shirt.
Avengers
So look
shirt,
at
yes.
that.
Right on. And actually, I had mentioned earlier that this was before the show, that when I was a kid, I used to always think that I was a superhero. I would daydream and dream that I was, what was his name? The Human Torch. I would see myself flying around, shooting fire in the living room, not getting things on fire. This is California. Not that I grew up here, but then I grew up and I realized I am a superhero. It just looks different than what I thought. I think we're probably all superheroes if we just tune in enough.
And I did catch my living room on fire once, but it went out really quick.
Me too. Me too. Oh, this is weird. Okay.
I was wearing one of my mother's dressing gowns, being a spiritual being, going around lighting candles, and the taper was getting hot, and so I got a Kleenex, and I was holding the taper with that, and then that caught on fire, and that was about to burn my hand, and I threw it on the ground on my mother's brand new white carpeting, and luckily she was there and was like, no.
Is it pyromania or is it lighting
No,
the spiritual fire?
Ooh.
It was only the one time. All right.
So,
Go ahead, please.
You were mentioning about caretaking. There was definitely caretaking.
Yes.
My sister and I always say, well, you cook for them, you clean for them, you try to guide them in the right direction, but you never know how your parents are going to turn out.
I love that.
I think there's something to be said for dysfunction, for the caretaking role that is kind of foisted upon you. It's regrettable in some ways as far as the development of one's psyche along what should be normal lines. I'm putting that in quotes. But there's something to be said for how that may prepare you for a relationship with spirit as well.
There are gifts from the garbage.
Absolutely, because, working with spirit and spirits, if depending on how you're doing it, there is a custodial piece to that as well. And there is a certain level of maturity that needs to be embraced when you're doing that type of work. If you're put into
to come in early.
Yeah.
It doesn't for all people, but
if you're put into that role of custodian or caretaker as a child, then you are familiar with the responsibility early on. Now, there are plenty of spiritual practitioners out there who may not be as ethical and custodial in the work that they do, but I think it would be maybe ideal, and I'm not trying to say, I'm the best at this because this is how I approach it, but I think it would be ideal to look at a relationship with spirit as a custodial one. Not that you are taking care of everyone, but that everyone is doing their part to take good care in the exchange of spiritual energies.
It feels that way to me, that of the spirit guides that have come in through the years, and when I finally accepted that this was the road and this was what was going on, that I would say thank you. So I'd have such gratitude for spirit for being there and for showing me the way or teaching me things. And I would say, what do I have to offer you? And the feeling has come back many times. You offer so much, and that there is a give and take between you and your guides is like any loving relationship where there's going to be a give and take. So I agree wholeheartedly.
I've always loved working with Anana in the past because she has such a goddess energy about her and
Yes.
such a gracious energy about how she works with spirit. And I would love to say that personality can come into play as well.
Yes.
It is well known among people who know me that I have a lot of personality. Like sometimes so much, I'm like, can we squelch this? No, we just can't.
Please no.
I have, you say that.
I imagine spirit paves the way for the expansion
And
of your
I have a very
personality.
cantankerous relationship with with anybody, but with my guides as well. I have laid my guides out. They have laid me out, and we can laugh about it at the end of the day.
Here's how
Just
we
like
are
real life.
different. And I wanted Corey to come on a lot for this because his take on working with guides is somewhat different than mine, but I love this part of it. It's not always an easy relationship.
Like any
There
relationship.
are arguments, would you say then?
Interesting.
Oh yeah, I remember one day I was at a good friend's, and the family stuck me in the room that's the most haunted. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic.
On purpose, just to see what you were going to...
No, that was the room that was available, and for kicks and giggles, they were like, how's this gonna go?
Oh.
And I told them, I'm like, I'm gonna win. If it comes down to it, I'm gonna win. So in the middle of the night, unfortunately, I felt a negative energy that was attacking me, and so I woke up and I did what I needed to do. I called in what I needed to call and got rid of it.
What do you mean by that? Because we also make sure people
yeah.
who may not know about this, you called in guidance?
So
or?
I probably called in Archangel Michael,
All right.
Yes,
who
we
I
like
lovingly
him.
call the Archangel of whoop ass.
Yeah.
Ooh.
You know, and sometimes you can dispel with negative energies with your own energy. It just it depends on what level of being you're dealing with. When I was a child, I used to play role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, and I'd watch all these cartoons and everything, and I don't think I ever disbelieved anything. I never saw any reason that something could not exist, and I think that served me very well when I grew up. And what I've come to understand in doing spiritual work over the years is that if it can be imagined, in some way, shape, or form, it probably
Is
exists.
true. Yes, probably exists.
Yeah, there's like...
That's true.
I want to say Steve Jobs said that, or somebody else said that. Yeah, I totally believe that.
Yeah, I really should work that to my benefit, like Steve Jobs. But,
It's in Shakespeare. It's in Conan Doyle also.
Okay.
Sherlock.
yeah, so Steve Jobs is just really derivative.
I just went straight for
Not
the
at all.
modern.
Not at all.
But it was interesting. So I dispelled with this energy, and then I saw an angel, and I could recognize it by the way the lights were swirling in the corner. And you would think that I'd be like, oh, that's wonderful. An angel has come in. And I turned and I said, hey, you with the light show, I'm trying to get some rest here. You're going to need to tone it down. But the thing is, and some people are like, wow, Corey, that's a really specific way of speaking with spirit. And I'm like, the thing is, the spirits that are working closely with me, they know who I am.
Yeah,
They know
Right.
who I come from because I come from a long line of trash talkers.
I love it.
Why should I be any different?
Exactly.
And if I were to tone it down and to be kind of love and light all the time, which, there are moments for that definitely, but my love and light comes with that kind of backhanded smack sometimes, like, let's love and light you onto the right path, So if I were to alter the way I, maneuver in the world to be just kind of all sweet and love and light, my guides would know that the gig is up. Hey, that's not you. Be real. We're being real with you, so be real with us. So, yes, it would be ideal to be as loving as you possibly can, but it doesn't have to look all the same. It doesn't have to be everybody holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It looks like whatever it looks like in you, because you are a very specific manifestation of the divine. And other divine entities are going to come and work with you based on the specificity of who you are.
Yes.
So it was fine that I kind of gave the angel the what for. I'm sure it got over it. What I do know is that it toned it down, and I slept well that night. I won.
So that was an angel that was in the room, but haunting the. I mean, basically
No.
Just
leaving
hanging?
or leaving
It was
an
probably
energy.
a supportive
All right.
energy. I don't know exactly why it came in, and I probably could have
We were
asked
waiting
it.
for you, maybe.
It could have been. It could have been
Yeah.
a new guy trying to come
Yeah.
in, which means
Yeah.
it probably made an appearance later.
Ah,
But I had mentioned earlier, I'd seen the wall open up, and all these kinds of things
Yes.
happen in my first year of school, and then I went off and studied in Brazil, and all these spirits of this religion started appearing to me, and I tried to go to religious events for this religion called Umbanda. I was actually teaching English at the time, and I had a lot of students who were members of this and other Afro-Brazilian religions. And as much as I would try to get out to them, I could just never get there. There was floods, or there would be strikes, and the buses were down.
Wow.
I just could never get there. But I had read up on the spirits, and the spirits started appearing to me. And it was a little freaky, but that was all.
did you do a ritual
Oh,
of
I
some
was-
kind, or
I-
how did
I
they
was
appear to
19.
you? You
I
were
was
just
19.
open
There
and
was no
okay,
ritual, no nothing.
Open
I
and
was-
ready for it. Okay.
I'm like, did I drink too much Brazilian rum that night? I'm seeing stuff, And so all that had started happening, but I knew there was something to it. And that was all I had with me when I started experiencing a lot of things in Africa. And
Was Brazil before?
yeah, it was
Senegal?
I had 3 months between
Okay.
them, and Brazil
All right.
was a semester. Senegal was about 10 months.
Wow, world traveler.
Yeah.
The spirit, you're dancing in Senegal. Spirit's going, we recognize you. And
Well, so I was heading out to an international cultural event held at this kind of, it's not even a suburb, it's like a small village within the capital, Dakar. It was called Yoff. And the ethnic group of the people, they were the Lebu, which was a sub-ethnic group of the main one, the Wolof, which is the language that I kind of speak. And they're actually my kind of people, because if you were to say in Wolof, hello, how you doing? The Lebu have kind of just a rough way of speaking. In Wolof, they say Lebu dafa dugar, which means the Lebu are rough. So it'd be more like, how the hell you doing? I mean, that's just kind of how it is. And,
thank you for that.
Very New
translation.
Yorker.
and that's really how I roll. So,
Yeah.
But they practice this very, very interesting religion called Ndup. Is it a religion? It's more like a ceremony, but they have historically had all these spirits associated with them, a whole pantheon of deities. And when Islam descended from North Africa in the 1500s, I believe, or maybe 15th century, I'm not the best historian, it came down, and much like Christianity, it said, oh, you're going to convert or we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
And
Choices.
Yeah, I was just gonna
They
say
had
that.
choices. The Lebu were very crafty. They said, oh, we're going to convert, and our spirits are going to convert too. Now they're Muslim. And they do all
And they're
this.
with us.
Yeah, and these deities were known for coming down and possessing people. And they'll have these ceremonies where the spirits are coming down, and they're like, oh, yeah, this is a Muslim ceremony. Now, you talk with some Muslims in Egypt, and they would be like, what? I don't know about all that.
Gosh.
But
Interesting.
the Lebu were very firm in that. So they didn't have a full ndup, which is actually an exorcism. is
Yeet.
what
Yeah,
that
let's
is.
talk about yeah.
But I'll talk about that.
Yeah.
She gets really excited.
It's like, oh, goody.
I grew up Catholic, so
Of course. What I have to say about that is I always found it really interesting, if you were to follow Hollywood, that the battle between good and evil always had to involve a Catholic priest and a demon. I'm like, well, okay, it's kind of
But there
interesting.
are
Yeah.
others.
There are other demons out there. Gosh, and there are other religions out there that deal with this stuff. And
yeah.
it's not necessarily all demons when we talk about possession either. But
Of course not.
no,
Yeah.
it could be
Right.
any number of things.
Yeah.
But don't get scared out there, folks. You're okay. But they decided to do a ceremony, kind of a blessing for the community. Now, at the time, I was studying modern dance, and another student, she also was a modern dancer, so they asked us to perform. And we had set that intention. We were doing some duet stuff, which was fine. But understand, at the time in Senegal, people did not touch, men and women did not touch dancing unless they were doing Latin dancing.
Oh.
So to see two people dancing with drums in the background and me lifting her high in the air and walking around with her and doing all this stuff, they were like, this is some serious scandal right here. But
It's hot.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Shocking.
this took place over the course of a couple days, and I was not staying in the village. I was staying in another part of the city. One night, I was just kind of sleeping on a foam mat at my friend's place, and I had a dream that I was in Yoff, and I saw all the Lebu around, and they're very tall, very elegant, dark-skinned people. And then I saw this very short, squat woman, and she was looking at me from like hundreds of feet away. And what was really interesting was that she had the body of somebody from Cape Verde that I had just gotten back from Cape Verde, where I went to experience the carnival, some islands off the coast of West Africa. And I loved it there. I didn't want to come back. And I saw this squat person that looked like a Cape Verdean. And then I looked at her face, and it was the face of the head priestess, Yof priestess, or Lebu priestess, excuse me, in the village of Yof. So it was like, take somebody's face and put it on this different body.
And put it on, yes.
And she looked at me, and I couldn't move.
Ooh.
And then she started walking towards me. This isn't a dream, and she's walking and walking and walking, and she doesn't stop when she gets to me. She walks right into me.
Whoa.
And I wake up that next morning, and I had this amazing egg on my head. Apparently, when she walked into me, I took and slammed my head into the corner of where the wall met the floor. And so I get back to the village the next day, and this is the day that I'm going to perform. And I told, kind of like the tour guide, I was like, yeah, I had this dream, and this body, this face hit my head. And he was like, oh, yeah, that's Mam Giada. Mam Giada is the head protectress of this village of Yof.
Mam Giada.
Mam
Mam
Giada.
Giada.
I love
And
that.
actually, it's really beautiful when you're there. You can see there's an island off the coast of Yof, and that's the island where Mam Giada lives.
So there's literally physical evidence that she was there, because you had
You
that.
can see that
That's
noggin.
amazing.
That's right. Well, and what's more is he said, oh, and why I also know that this is Mam Giada is that she often appears with the face of the head priestess of the village.
Which actually would make sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And furthermore, she
Comfortable there, too, I'm
often,
sure.
Yeah, and what also makes sense is that she appears to you often in a form that is very comforting to you. And I had just gotten back from Cape Verde and did not want to leave.
Oh.
So all that, mix it up, and you got
She
yourself a
presented.
recipe.
All right.
So I performed, it went well, and then they did a ceremony to benefit the community, which it involved the sacrifice of chickens. We had to say a wish for ourselves, or, after saying a wish for the community, speak them into a mouth of a chicken, spit in the chicken's mouth, and then they sacrificed the chicken.
Wow.
And when they did that for me, because there were other foreigners there, they had all the foreigners do that. You know, chickens don't die right away after you cut their heads off. Or
Right,
they
the body.
do, but they don't stop moving.
Right.
Mine ran around for 3 minutes without a head.
Wow.
And they said, you have a lot of energy on you. I was like, okay, whatever. A friend of mine that was there.
Was this maybe I'm not understanding. Was this an honor to you or to help you in some way?
This was kind of for everybody.
For everybody,
we're
for the
saying
community.
We're saying
Yes.
a wish for the
Yeah.
community.
Right.
And so
Right.
I probably said something along the lines of, I hope that this ecotourism, because it's an eco-village, that this ecotourism really takes off. And I don't know what I wish for myself. Had a chat with the chicken.
All right.
poor
Okay.
guy. And that's how that started. Well, I was there with a friend who was, I wonder where she is now. Her name was Colette. She was doing research on transpossession in Islam. And she was on a fellowship. She was doing it. She started in Amsterdam and was working her way down through Africa. And she actually was from New Orleans and grew up in a household that practiced voodoo. And
Awesome.
she was
As I'm sitting here wondering how she was comfortable with that, so now I understand.
she was very nervous, and so was I, because we knew that what was going to happen next was a ceremony where a spirit could come down.
Right.
And I never experienced this before, but I've always been fascinated by the idea of possession, and somewhere I knew that I could be prone to it. She, having grown up in a voodoo household, knew that that kind of thing could happen. And we had heard that it would not be the first time that it happened to foreigners before.
Well, that would make sense.
Yeah.
You're more open.
I guess so. I didn't even know I was
We're
open,
not
but-
aware of how to
Yeah, exactly. How to
I would
protect
I would
yourself.
often call it protection,
Yeah.
but it can also be just not knowing how it all works, so more susceptible.
And tired, probably.
I should have brought my photograph to show you. I'll have to show you guys sometime. But the
Another reason to have him back.
Yes.
the ceremony started with all the priestesses of the village walking around the sacred tree. And, you know, in Senegal, at least at the time, people wore these grand boo-boos that are like just big robes, and there are layers to them. You're not showing your body very much. And I say this for a reason in a minute. Then the drummers came out. And the thing with this culture is that the specific spirits are associated with specific rhythms. And so...
That makes sense.
Correspondences.
Yeah, exactly.
We were just talking about that.
And so they... started playing a particular rhythm, and all of a sudden 3 women started screaming. Now they were not in possession. Actually, what happened was they recognized the rhythm, and they knew that it was a spirit that was very closely associated with them, and they did not, I repeat, did not want to fall under the influence of the spirit.
Of that spirit?
Not that the spirit, there was anything wrong with the spirit. It was a warrior spirit of the ocean, and that's all well and good. It's just, it can be an exhausting process.
I was going to say, it was probably intense, a warrior.
To undergo the experience of possession period.
Yeah.
Even if it's a gentle one, because you're not fully you in that time, and that's a different experience.
And you're probably fighting within yourself, right? I mean, at least that's what
it depends. Some people are more inclined.
You're holding ground. You're holding space and holding ground.
Or your space is being held.
Is being held.
And that was more the feel in this culture. I later went on to study spirit possession in different contexts, and there was a different approach to it. But here, these 3 women got up and started running. They actually took their fingers and started muffling the sound and screaming because they were trying to alter the rhythm so as to not be affected by the spirit. 2 of them got away. One did this thing that I had never seen before or since. She stopped once she got outside of the circle of everyone sitting, and she was pulled back in. Now, she moved at a relatively decent clip, but her feet didn't touch the ground as often as they probably should have. It was like something was pulling her, and every now and then a foot would touch the ground. It was almost like a levitation or something like that. And I was like, wow, that's impressive. And in the meantime, my friend and I are like, please don't get us, please.
That would have been me. Not ready yet.
One of the priestesses wearing her grand boo-boo, you know, several layers, she was taken by the spirit. And so I have these pictures of this woman just walking around normally, and then another picture where her eyes are just really big. And then another picture where, actually, I don't know if I have the picture, but because it would have been kind of inappropriate to take it, but she had stripped her grand boo-boo off. She was in her bra and underwear before they removed her from spirit, because then it would have just been a little bit much.
Okay.
About 3 or 4 young ladies kind of fell under the influence of the spirit, and they were in front of the drums and swimming with their faces down in the sand because it was this warrior spirit of the ocean. They were rowing in the sand, they were dancing, and they were fighting each other because it was a warrior spirit. There was a woman that was sitting atop a stoop of 3 steps, and she was cool. I mean, this wasn't my spirit. Well, all of a sudden she had a moment, and I saw her hurl herself down. It's only 3 steps, but there was a little 3-year-old child at the bottom of the steps, and she was out. So that kid got kicked in the face and had a little bit of a shiner from that. And she was rolling around in the sand with her arms behind her back as if she was tied up like a slave. And Senegal was one of the major ports for the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm like, I'm seeing something else going on here. This is kind of amazing. Well, her daughter was horrified to see her like this. And so she started trying to grab her mom and get her out of there. But this is an affair of spirit, and this is not something for humans to intervene with. So one of the priestesses, who had to be in her 70s, this little old lady, and I have this picture of her, she just looks very sweet. She was lebu, and she was under the influence of spirit. And so she was like, you get the bleep out of here. You can't mess with the influence of spirit. Bleep, 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 bleep. You know? So they were about to fight, and neither of them were possessed, but everybody was feeling the energy, the spirit. And the people stayed in possession until a head priest came and took them out. It was amazing to watch. And when they came out of trance, they went and were put into bed for 3-4 hours. They were out. They were out.
Oh, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
I have spiritual hangover after ritual.
What is your take from that? It sounds to me like the spirit was telling stories, was showing how to worship the sacredness of that spirit. Clearly told a slave story.
That's interesting.
Stories of the land, perhaps.
Yeah, I never thought about it particularly like that. I think a fair amount of it is the spirit gets its chance to play. And by play, I don't mean play with people, but to
Not play with people. All
no,
right,
but
all
to
right.
but to manifest in the physical.
Into the physical. All right. all
And
right.
so there is this, I would say, sacred contract. Like I get my
I get some
footing,
space here.
my tangibility on earth, and I bless you in
in
response.
return.
And maybe stories are told in there. Now, I read into the story of what I saw there. I don't think that anybody else would have necessarily seen
right.
that, but perhaps there could have been several stories being told.
Yeah. I love that idea that they're there
is
to
what
tell you a
make it
story.
Well, they're clearly there to do a whole lot of things.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
They're multitaskers.
And how
Yeah.
what do you know of and for yourself coming out of it at the end? Not just that one, but you've had experiences coming out of it. What is left to you or given to you?
So I'm going to defer to that religion that I had mentioned in Brazil called Umbanda. I went later on to research it. So I was talking about performance studies. Performance in a larger context than just the theater. So I went on to do my graduate research on Afro-Brazilian spirit possession as performance. And so I used the language of the theater to describe the event of possession, because ever since I was a child, I always found possession interesting. I get
To say the least.
I grew up in a bunch of different types of churches, and I found them all relatively boring. But I always sat up when the Pentecostals were speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Tongues and so forth. Yes.
I'm like 8, 9 years old. Like, this mess is interesting right here.
Did you ever get to speak in tongues?
Oh no, I was never inclined. I have way too much of an ego to let spirit in. Once or twice, things have happened where spirit has come and spoken like really strongly through me in a way that I couldn't deny. So I was using the language of the theater to describe the event of spirit possession. And in this religion, you had several different classes of spirits, starting at the top with the African gods and goddesses of the Yoruba tradition from Nigeria. But underneath that, you would have different characters or classes of spirits that were present in the colonial history of Brazil. I find it actually a beautiful historical religion because it talks about the history of the colony and the religion. And it's an interesting reverse racial hierarchy. It's like the closer to Africa you are, the higher up you are in the hierarchy.
Right.
So right beneath them, you had like 2 different classes of spirits. One was the pretos velhos, which in Portuguese means the old black people. And it was kind of like the first generation African slaves in the Brazilian colony.
Slave ancestor.
Yes.
All right.
And then on the same level pretty much is the caboclos, which were the first generation of Native Americans that experienced the colony, that engaged with the colony. And then you would go down different classes, and we have a mermaid doll sitting here. Generally,
Thank you, my friend Tina.
Right? Hello, Tina. Generally, they were different human figures, like down to the lowest class. The Exus were the former pimps, prostitutes, and corrupt politicians of the Brazilian colony, and from around the world as well. But then sometimes things would get really esoteric. So you had the mermeias, which were the mermaids, and you had the crianças, which were children, but they were actually really elevated spirits that came in very childlike presences.
Possibly what we would call cherubs.
Perhaps, but I don't know if there'll be time for it. But I'll have to tell you about the time that I saw a criança come through. It was like acting like a big baby, and it just it kept on saying eu quero. It was like
all right.
It was like
okay.
eu quero mel, eu gosto de mel. It's like I want honey. I like honey. So acting like a big baby,
Like a
but
big child.
very much
Okay.
an elevated
All right.
spirit. And
Okay.
so these spirits were given certain days that they would come through and manifest, specific days for specific spirits, and each class had its own job. Now, what they were to do is to come in and possess a member of the spiritual community that's trained for this,
Okay, good.
and give readings to members of the at-large spiritual community that come and pay a nominal fee to get advice on their lives. But when they were manifesting through the body of an umbandista or umbanda practitioner, they're speaking a colonial form of Portuguese from 1500, 1600 in Brazil. So actually, they needed to have a cambono, which is a helper, because the helper
translate?
would translate from Portuguese to Portuguese. And what I always found interesting was I always understood the colonial Portuguese. And trust you me, I never learned that in school. But they also would aid the spirit because the spirit, when it came into body, it had its needs. And different classes had different things. So if you were dealing with a Baiano, which was somebody from the former capital in Bahia, they wanted to drink coconut water and they wanted to smoke cigars.
Ah.
If you had a boiadeiro, which was a cowboy, they wanted to smoke cigarettes and drink malt liquor. And so the helper, because like you do.
Yeah.
Bring us our favorite things, please.
These are a few of my favorite things. So yeah, there's the theater background. Can't help it. So, these spirits would come down and they would serve the purpose of giving information that they have access to on the spiritual level to the community member who really needs help with their mundane life. But in doing so, that spirit gains some karma points. Not that they have a point system, but just informally.
Kind of in the universe, though.
Absolutely. And in the mini
balancing
universe,
out eventually.
right? And in the mini universe of Umbanda as well, there is kind of a keeping tally. So those spirits would take up, and maybe they'd move up to another class. Maybe they would get closer to transcending because all of these classes were underneath the auspices or aegis of one of the gods or the other. But in this particular religion, as opposed to other ones that have its roots in the Yoruba tradition of Nigeria, the gods are not going to come down through a person. They're just way too on high.
Right.
But by doing this work, the various classes of spirits can get closer to the gods.
Ah.
And then the helpers and the humans that are being possessed are also improving their karma by serving as, by being in service to the spirit. The person getting possessed, they're called the cavalo, the horse. In a lot of different traditions, you'll hear the people being possessed referred to as mounts or the horses.
The horses.
They're doing a lot of the work. Now, there were different levels of possession. They could be fully possessed, which means kind of like in Senegal, they're out and then they wake up like, what happened?
What happened, yes.
Or they could be half possessed,
Full
where they were
trance.
kind of aware of what was going on, but had no real agency in it. And they did all kinds of training to achieve that. And, they would test them, like sometimes burning a cigar on their hand, like, oh, you feel that? You feel that? How's that feel? Exactly. But it was amazing to watch. So there was all kinds of benefit. And what I did academically was, okay, well, let me see who's the spectator, who's the performer. How's this energy going? Because when you have like a traditional play on a proscenium stage, you have the stage up here and you have the people sitting down there and you see the energy going back and forth. But this was like energy was heading in every direction at every moment in time. So it was kind of fascinating to watch.
My God.
Do you remember if your energy level when you were watching all this, was it up high or?
Yeah, it was definitely elevated because before even the spirits were coming down, we were doing rituals to start.
Okay.
These rituals were very Catholic because in a process of syncretism, which is blending of religions, and particularly religions that are like European or more predominant with more indigenous religions, the Brazilian slaves were able to practice their versions of their original religions by hiding behind Catholicism. So they were not allowed to worship Oshun, but they could sure do a ritual to Santa Barbara, St. Barbara, who shared a lot of characteristics with Oshun. And they would say to the slave owners, oh, well, we're doing this for Santa Barbara. And they're like, oh, okay, that's great. And they're really doing it for Oshun. So the whole congregation was saying Hail Marys and Our Father who art in heaven. I probably could still pull that out in Portuguese from doing all that. But they were doing that, and it was elevating the level, and there was music, and I mean, it was an absolute like cornucopia of spiritual energy. So yeah, you're definitely feeling it.
So that
How delicious.
vibration is rising.
It's kind of like in the spiritualist tradition where they sing songs to raise the level of spirit, and then
to
the possession.
Evoke spirit, right?
And they might not use the word possession, but then the trance would. Whatever they would call it.
Yeah.
So every time we talk about possession, it isn't necessarily a negative thing.
It's
of
not like that
people
movie.
who don't, many movies who don't want the spirit within them. They do.
Oh yeah.
they want to welcome it.
Yeah, everyone's working together.
Yes.
And again, in that religion, it
Powerful.
was so fascinating to watch how a person's total affect would change. I think I was telling you the other day, I'd love to share this story again.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to hear.
I went,
Oh, this was beautiful.
yeah,
Yes.
this was like one of my favorite experiences of spirit. I went to one religious center where I had been doing a little bit of work, and I asked the head priest and priestess, could I record some of what's going on? Can I take some notes? And they said, yeah, you want to work with, I think his name might have been Edson. Edson, he has a history of working with sociologists and anthropologists who come in from universities. I said, that's great. And so I let the Kambonu, the helper, know what was going to happen, and I let Edson know as well. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. And so it was time for the procession to happen, and he had a caboclo, an indigenous spirit, come down. And the caboclos, bear in mind that historically, this was their first generation of having access to the Brazilian colony. So they weren't that great at Portuguese, and they had very kind of stereotypically indigenous, reserved, and perhaps gruff ways about them. They were known for being kind of rough on the people that they were working with. And I thought, oh, that works well, fine for me. And so this spirit came through, and I was ushered to him. And unlike most people who go to these centers who are like, oh, well, my husband, my wife, my money, even if I had not had my intuitive ways and had access to that on my own, I had been doing so much research. I had asked all the questions I could possibly ask. So I probably asked one or two questions just to make it seem like I really cared about what was going on with my money. And then I got into the other questions, which was asking this spirit about his own life when he was alive.
Right.
Oh, how fun.
And it took him by surprise, but he did his best to field those questions. And then at the end of it all, I asked him, I said, a gente pode tirar uma foto? I said, can we take a photo?
Yes.
And he
Interesting.
said, well, did you ask the head priestess? And I said, yes, senor. He said, did you ask the head priest? Oh, absolutely, senor. And then he turned, and his eyes were kind of, hazy because he was in trance. And he turned to the Kambono, and she said, oh, it's going to be fine, senor. He said, okay, we can do this. And then he said, can you tell me what a photo is?
How adorable.
Yeah, it was. And actually, he had been gentle with me the whole time, and everyone was like, he was much more gentle with you than he is with everybody else. I'm like, I don't know. And so I said, it's an image of you, senor. And so we had somebody take a photo. At that time, it was like in 2003. It was a digital camera. No iPhones back then. And so they took the photo, and I pulled it up, and I showed him the photograph, and he said, oh, aren't you a handsome fellow? I said, oh, thank you, senor. And then he said, well, who's that? Because bear in mind that spirit's consciousness of what it looked like however many hundred years ago was not of
Would
Edson.
not be
No,
there,
that's right. They
yes.
wouldn't.
Nothing
Right.
against you, Edson. You're a
Right.
perfectly handsome fellow.
Right.
Yes.
And then I said, that's you, senor. And it was just, this old ancient spirit, even with such wisdom, almost childlike. It was so endearing. I get verklempt every time I think about it.
Just got happy chills.
Yeah.
I've seen this sort of trance channeling that changes faces, alters the whole physical presence, and quite possibly of whoever was, how their lives were. Have you seen that as well?
It's a blending of consciousnesses. And
Yeah.
as we were mentioning before, it's not always something that's divine and on high that comes through. Not to say
True.
that spirits that have passed to the other side are low, but relatively speaking, it's not the same kind of thing as having an angel or something come through you. And so if you're dealing with something that was either very, very attached to the conditions surrounding the end of its life, or not that far out from the end of its life, like for instance, earthbounds, a type of spirit that's stuck in a
Yes.
place, the ones that you see the ghost hunters going after for
Going
a long
after,
time,
right.
they might be more inclined to the physical issues, or even just the physicality that they had in life. You have a blending of the spirit with the cavalo, the horse or the mount that is working with it, and that could take on a very physical aspect. And it also depends on the person who is bringing the spirit through. I'm a person, I'm an earth sign, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm very inclined to work things through in my body. And so if I were to get possessed, I wouldn't be surprised if my physical affect would really, really adopt
Alter
that
it.
of the spirit that was coming through. If that spirit, in fact, were something that that was carrying a history of its own physicality with it as well. If that answers your question.
It does. Yes. No, completely.
Well, you're definitely coming back. I
Well,
mean,
we didn't even get to.
but I
to a
see
few
you
things
have a
on-
book open.
Oh, so that.
Oh, we wanted to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about astrology, and I had asked about retrogrades and
Yeah, so I've been an astrologer, practicing astrologer since 2002, maybe. And that was one of the things I used to do when we worked together at Alexandria. And it's interesting. People are like, oh, well, such and such is retrograde. When is it retrograde, Corey? And I say, oh, I don't know. You know, I'm a Capricorn, which means I'm very practical and even transactional. I'm like, I'll tell you everything that's going on in the skies if you ask me or pay me, you know, one or the other will help. But otherwise, I'm just trying to live life. And so
Right.
I knew that Mercury was going to be retrograde. Venus is probably retrograde. And you had mentioned Saturn and some of the outer
Saturn
planets.
took a couple of years there. I know
Yeah.
some of them are very long term in retrograde, but
Sure.
this summer there were 6 planets at one point.
Yeah, they were all going.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who don't deal with
Is
astrology
that because
too much.
Trump became president and they were just retreating from the skies? Or no,
Perhaps.
sorry, I'm teasing.
So, you know, for those who are not too familiar with astrology, the planets all represent different aspects of the experience of life. I would say human, but it's not just human. Aspects of the psyche, aspects of spirituality. And they're all moving around the sun. They are all moving forward. However, they're not moving forward at the same rates. And when a planet relative to Earth is moving such that it looks like it's going backwards, even though we know it's really not, since we are living on this planet, the energies that are represented by that said planet are also kind of going backwards, turning inwards, not working as well as they usually do. Now, most people hear a lot about Mercury retrograde, and that's because Mercury is the closest to the sun, and so its motion is faster, and so we're going to see that happen more often than... You're just talking about Mercury retrograde, right? Remember that one? Thank you.
And my daughter's not feeling good, so I will probably not be able to go to lunch.
Oh. I thought she was taking exams.
Yeah, she said I'm gonna try and get it done early because she's like, I'm feeling very bad.
Oh. Did you get your doctor's call? Or?
No.
Oh.
And I think she's just got a cold and then all this
Yeah.
crap in the
Well,
air.
all the stuff, yeah.
Sorry.
So most often people think about retrograde planets by hearing about Mercury retrograde.
Yes.
And because it's so close to the sun and its motion is faster than all the other planets, we're going to see its kind of hiccup motion or the retrograde motion more often than we will with other planets. And truly with Mercury, which represents communication, both written and spoken, also electronics, we can often see that during those periods of retrograde, things go a little bit nuts.
A little haywire, yes.
Yeah, computers break down a little bit more. Technology goes nuts. You say one thing,
Yes.
people hear the other thing.
Yeah.
It's generally a hard time for people. However, if you were born during a time when Mercury was retrograde, the times in the sky where Mercury is retrograde are actually your times to shine because that's like your home base. Of course, that means that the rest of the time throughout the year, it's like, why don't people understand me? People who are born with Mercury retrograde often say things like, you know, the sky is blue, and somebody says, no, the sky is not green. It's like, I didn't even say that. What are you talking about?
What are you hearing?
But because of being born during a time when Mercury was kind of going screwy, you can be perceived as a little screwy or a little different. What it makes
That might be me.
what it makes for is a perfect writer, because it turns the process of communication inward, which is very much a writer's process as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
The same can be said for any other planet. Right now, we're in Venus retrograde, and actually, thankfully, it's going out of retrograde, I think, on Friday. And Venus represents love, friendship, networking, you know, social experience in general.
I can breathe easier.
You can definitely breathe easier because you are a Libra and ruled by Venus. And so during that time, what a lot of people have seen is exes coming back. Whether they have been making an appearance in the physical or coming back into your consciousness a whole lot more, a lot of nostalgia about past relationships or past patterns in relationships.
In relationships, yeah.
Friendships that may have gone away, springing back up. These things kind of
Whether you
turning
want
back,
them to or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These things turning up because the energy has turned backwards or inwards. Now, you had mentioned Saturn and I think maybe Pluto as well. The farther you get out, the longer the length of time the planet is going to be retrograde.
It's going to be retrograde.
So it's not as impactful. Actually, I hate that word, impactful. It does not have as much of an impact necessarily in the way that you think of Mercury retrograde for Pluto to be retrograde. It does have an impact, don't get me wrong, because every planet, no matter where it is, will have an impact in your chart. In the instance of Pluto, that is the planet of change and transformation. So wherever Pluto is hitting in your chart, that is, you can best believe that is where you're experiencing change and transformation in your life. Now, if it were in your 10th house, which is the house of career, and all of a sudden you're feeling things are starting to change, and then it goes retrograde, that means it's going to spend more time in that 10th house. So that's the type of impact that it will have. But the actual energy of Pluto retrograde itself, I don't give it as much credence. Now, Saturn is a little bit closer in, and Saturn is a very interesting planet for retrograde because Saturn represents the fathering principle, responsibility, and structure. Lots of times when people are born with a Saturn retrograde, like I am, they say that often represents a non-present father, whether physically or emotionally. And as much as I loved my father, that was definitely my experience. But when it goes retrograde, the question that can be asked is, as far as authority and responsibility in your life, where are you cutting corners? Where are you not necessarily standing in the same amount of power and stability that you usually would? Or how can I turn that energy inward and get more structured in my own life internally so that I can bring more structure and responsibility to the world outside of me?
Powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I'm hearing, of course, we all parent ourselves at some point, and all the transitions we go through from healing from the things that might have happened in childhood to acceptance and to really embracing who you are. And
Saturn retrograde is a perfect time to look at the fathering principle
it does
within.
come up, doesn't
You
it?
know,
Yes.
do you need to father yourself where you weren't fathered before?
That's intense.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I like that. Thank you.
I wanted to go on to upcoming events.
Yes.
Because you have something that's coming up. Is it?
I'm trying. So
you're thinking about it. Okay.
I don't have the exact date in my mind. It's a weekend in January. What is it? The 11th, 12th, 13th? I don't have the calendar in front of me. So I'm trying to get in. So it's Current Pagan Studies Conference that happens at Claremont Colleges.
Ooh.
And I am about to submit a paper, which, let me see, I have the title somewhere in my head. Well, it's about DNA testing. It's about purity in pagan practice and racial bias.
Ooh, yes, I want to go.
Yeah.
Truly fascinating.
So I need
It's a great conference for
Yeah.
anybody.
it is a great conference where
interested.
people in the academic world and in the
Yes.
practitioner world come together and speak and pontificate about
Yes.
different pagan practices.
Give their papers
Yeah.
and talks. Yeah.
So I'll be
Very
doing
good.
some interviews of people of color in different pagan practices and any experiences that they may have had that were perceived to be influenced by race. And, questioning this idea of what is purity. I would think that it would have something to do with the integrity of the spiritual practice itself, of the actual act of practicing the spirituality. But there are certain traditions that have been seen as a pagan home for white nationalism, which, is... I don't know if there is actually written in historical or religious texts that that's what it was meant to be. But you also see in this era where people are white nationalists, and a few of them are doing DNA testing, and they're finding out that they're not exactly what they thought they were.
Of course not.
So then the question, right? So then the question becomes, well, what is pure? What is
So
pure?
what
and
is that?
and do I need to go through my DNA and say, okay, well, I'm 27% from Togo and Benin. Does that mean I need to practice voodoo, like because it originally started in Benin? Or do I need to do that as 27% of my spiritual practice? Do I need to be 22% Anglican? You know,
Goodness, whatever you want to
I
be.
think that's
is-
getting.
Well, and it's to highlight kind of how ridiculous this idea of purity is anyway. So that's the
Right.
main thing that I have coming up. You know, I kind of have kept
Tremendous.
my spirituality a little bit under wraps. You know, I do see clients, but I don't advertise it anymore. I'm not really out there so much. So I'm kind of focusing on getting into graduate school right now. And
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So that's
Where can people
Yeah.
reach you if they want to check out when
Shoot-
you're giving,
sure.
when and
Shoot
if
me-
you're giving the talk, or
honestly, oh, well, just shoot
for
me an email.
sessions with you?
Shoot me an email.
All
My
right.
email is Corey, spelled with an EY, Corey at CoreyRobertsAstrology.com. And don't go to the website because I'm not going to let you have access to it. Just shoot me an email personally and tell me what you're looking for, and we can talk about that all.
Ooh,
right.
I might have to do
That's wonderful.
that. Do we have?
And as always, you can reach me at inanamoon.com. But I'm looking forward to, we talked about either a meditation or something that you might want to offer today, and you had something really beautiful.
You know, I was thinking about it, and for some reason, the first thing that came to my mind was the prayer I say before eating. And, you know, feel free to do with this as you will. We don't have any food in front of us right now, but
That's all right.
I rarely ever say it out loud, so I'll just go with it.
Please.
I'd like to give thanks for all the beings that came here to create this meal. May they heal and nourish us from top to bottom, left to right, front to back, side to side, mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And a little side note here, this is for people who really want to go for it. Karmically, causally, astrally, magically, and in all other energy bodies. For this and all things I pray, in love and light. It is said.
So may it be.
Blessed be.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you so much for being with us, and looking forward for you to come back.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Thank you, Allison Warner. Thank you, David Shostak, for your music. Thank you, all of you, for joining us in Cruising in the Light and Shadow.
This has truly been a blessing today. Thank you. This is Inanna Moon.
I'm Sheila Kicha-Marie, reminding you that love is everywhere. Our lives touch everyone and everything. Please go forth in love.
Om Shanti.